got webinar number 3, going through some hints and tips provided by Namtar, who's one of our ATIMs, or Advice and Technology Improvement Managers. So he'll be running the next half hour to go through some of the hints and tips he's been providing to a number of different practices to share that with everyone. So Nam, I'll go ahead and hand over to you.
Thanks for that, Noah. Okay, so as Noah mentioned, today we're going to be focusing on some hints and tips for Prime, and I'll go through a few different areas. In terms of today's session outline, I'll take you through a few time savers, hints and tips in fact find, discovery and objectives, the fact section within Prime, analysis, all the important assumptions area, which configures a lot of the cash flow. So the session will run for roughly about half an hour. Okay, so in terms of time savers, there is a Prime drop-down menu, and I will log into Prime shortly and take you through all these different hints and tips. But in the drop-down menu, you should be able to create Prime file notes. It will also allow you to switch quickly between Prime and XPLAN. You also have the ability to generate the Prime SOA without having to go directly into the advice area within Prime. It will also allow you to quickly access the Prime fact find if you need to go back to the Prime fact find, and there is a very handy help wizard available. Okay, so let's go through all of these. So this drop-down menu is actually relatively hidden. It's actually underneath the magnifying glass when you log into Prime. So I'm in a client and case at the moment, and if you click on this little drop-down, you do have different options here. So one of these options is add file note. So you have the ability to add a file note for the client, and this will actually be retained in XPLAN as well. Okay, so there's full integration between Prime and XPLAN. Okay, so the other two areas within the X merge is that you're able to generate the Prime SOA within the drop-down menu, as well as the insurance needs analysis file note. So that's if you're using the insurance needs analysis within Prime, and I'll also take you through the 3 different options where you can calculate your client's insurance. Okay, so this will provide you with a file note on how you've calculated the amount of cover. Okay, so if you wanted to switch back to XPLAN, so I'm just going to close down XPLAN. So I've got 2 open at the moment. So let's say you've only got Prime open. If you want to switch back to XPLAN, if you click on Go to XPLAN, this will then log you back into XPLAN without you having to open up another window. And similarly, if you want to go straight to the Prime Fact Find within XPLAN, by clicking on Prime Fact Find in that drop-down menu, it will take you straight to the Prime Fact Find. Okay, so you can, if you close that down, that will then close down that window in the Prime Fact Find. So the last area I do want to show you within this drop-down menu is the Help Wizard, and there's also a lot of hints and tips in this Help Wizard within the different modules within Prime. Okay, so if I jump straight to facts, okay, so if you click Show Me, it will show you some of these hints and tips. Okay, so that's the drop-down menu. So in terms of the fact find, so the areas within fact find where you can save some time, and I've seen advisors and also practice staff do make a few mistakes or miss data, is in estate planning, so especially the scope, linking the employment income. If you do have a data feed, you do have the ability to link assets or superannuation to that data feed. We'll go through the liabilities or loan repayments, and I've also seen some practices also add in tax and also insurance premiums as an expense, and I'll explain that shortly. So the last point, there's risk profiling. What we'll also go through is insurance and superannuation, as well as the reverse fact find. So let's go into Prime, and I'll take you through a few of these. Okay, so this is actually in XPLAN in the fact find, so it's going to go into XPLAN. Okay, so I'm in the client at the moment, Lachlan Green, and I'm just going to jump straight into the Prime fact find. So the first thing I do want to take you through is the fact find scope. Okay, and I mentioned before with estate planning, if you do want that section in the About You, do you have a will, has the will been recently updated and so forth. If you do want that to flow through into the About You section of the SOA, then you should tick this estate planning box. What that will then do, being a wizard, that will then open up the estate planning area, and you can then answer some of these questions, and they will then appear in the SOA in the About You section. Okay, so in terms of employment and linking the income, okay, so employment is actually found in personal details, so it's actually a bit further down. Okay, so here's the employment. Here's one I've added in earlier, and you know that you've linked the income where you've got this sort of link icon. Okay, so when you're adding this in initially, I'll click on add. Okay, so you fill out the employment details, the occupation, job title of the employer, and if you then click on this little plus button, that will then open up the field where you can then add the client's income. Okay, so by adding in this area, that will then link the income. That income will then also appear in the cash flow income section, so you don't have to add it in again. Okay, so I'm just going to take you through to the net wealth section. And if you are running a data feed, you do have the option of adding an investment asset or platform in this area, and that will then bring through the current balance and also any underlying investment options if that's available in that data feed. Okay, so usually it'll be an investment platform. Okay, and then if you go to funds, okay, you do have the option here to link this to a portfolio account. So obviously in this scenario we don't have any existing data feeds, but if you do have a data feed and you feel that it's current and up to date and all the balances are correct, you do have the option then to link it. That will then, the details will then flow through into the Prime Fact Find. Okay, just in terms of liabilities, if you are adding in a liability, let's say for example a client mortgage, okay, just ensure that you also add in the repayments as well, so that these repayments are captured in the cash flow within Prime. Okay, so I've noticed that a few advisors haven't been capturing in the loan repayments. So if you want your cash flow to be accurate, to add the loan repayment in that liability section right here. What you shouldn't be adding in, I'm just going to go to the cash flow section. So this will then represent the income and expense area. So I have noticed a few advisors at this point adding in tax as an expense. So you actually don't need to add in tax if the client has a salary. You don't need to add that in because Prime will actually calculate the tax payable. You also don't add in insurance premiums in this expense area as well. Okay, so there is an insurance area where you capture the insurance premiums, and that will then flow through to the Prime cash flow area in analysis and in current situation. In terms of the risk profiling, it is important that once you change the risk profile, that you click on Update and then Next or Save. If you don't click on Update, that won't retain the changes. Okay, so that's a bit of a trap there. So the two main areas where I find that the fact find data just hasn't been quite as accurate is in insurance and in superannuation. So I'm just going to jump into insurance now. Okay, so you can see here this client has some term life and TPD insurance. So this ownership button next to cover, this is where you can actually link the insurance, if it's within super, to a superannuation fund. Okay, so obviously that superannuation fund needs to be added into fact find, but this is where the linking occurs. Also, to dictate whether the insurance is inside or outside of super, you need to actually go into the insurance type. So in this case, we've gone into the term life, and you can see here this button called Is Super. This is what controls or dictates whether that premium is inside or outside of super. Okay, so that's important from a cash flow point of view because if it's outside of super, that will then obviously be funded through cash flow. If it's inside of super, that will then show within the superannuation section within analysis. I'll also show you in Discovery on how you can check these before you go ahead and go through your prime case. Okay, so I'm just going to jump now to superannuation and take you through a few things. Okay, so with superannuation, when you are adding in a superannuation, it's important that you not only add in the balances, okay, so update obviously the superannuation details, but put in the balance, and the balance needs to match the investment options when you're adding in the underlying investments. Also, in the insurance tab, this is where you can actually link your insurance that's within that super, so that the system knows that insurance is contained within that superannuation fund. Okay, so those three tabs are quite important. So besides the details tab, so you've got here link to portfolio account. Once again, you do have the option of linking the superannuation fund if you are running a data feed in this area. Okay, so details, balances, investment options, and insurance. The contributions tab is also quite important. So by adding in things like your employee contributions, that will then appear in Prime, and I'll take you through the assumptions area later, where it will pick up these contributions in the cash flow. Okay, so the last thing I do want to show you within Fact Find is this attachments area, because you do have the ability to print out a reverse Fact Find, and there are also blank working papers if you do use working papers or the bid working papers. Okay, so to generate these, click on Next, and you then just click on Merge Fact Find. That will then generate whatever you've ticked, and you'll see that in the envelope icon within XPLAN. Okay, so that takes us through the hints and tips in Fact Find. What I want to take you through now is some hints and tips in Discovery and Objectives. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that XPLAN and Prime, it's fully integrated, so any updates you make within Prime Discovery will then feed back into XPLAN, so the XPLAN Fact Find. So when you get into Discovery, ideally you'll be using Discovery to review the information that you've entered into the Prime Fact Find, and I'll show you a quick way you can do that. I'll also discuss in regards to in-scope objectives, and also how you can order the objectives in terms of priority. That also affects the order you see the different screens within Prime. Okay, so let's jump into Prime and we'll go through Discovery and also Objectives. Okay, so we're in Discovery at the moment. So usually you, once you create a case, the default screen is Discovery. At this point, what you'd want to do is go in here and just ensure that your fact find data is correct. So there's some high-level details straight away. So you can see income and expenses, client's income is correct. We've got one expense. If you do want to view further details in regard to these areas, click on the little hamburger icon, and you can see here the income and general living expense there. If at this stage you've forgotten to add any items in, so let's say for example for the income you might want to put in there further income, you can add in further income at this stage, so I'm just going to put in some bonuses. That's a pretty nice bonus. And click on Save, and what that will do is that will then bring that back into the Prime Fact Find because it's fully integrated. Okay, so use Discovery as a way to review data and update your data. Probably the most important area that you do want to review is the protection policies, and just ensure that, in particular, if it's sitting within super, that you've got the premiums correct, whether it's inside or outside of super. Okay, so I'll see a lot of scenarios where advisors don't actually check that is super yes or no. So this area will allow you to quickly show you whether you've done that correctly or not. If you haven't, then it's just a matter of going in there and updating it. This will then flow through the cash flow area within Prime. Okay, so that's quite important there. The cover area will allow you to link the insurance policy to a risk researcher product. Okay, so that's an important step. Otherwise, when you go to the solutions area, it'll also prompt you to do that again. So if you haven't already done it here. In terms of objectives and scoping, so really there are only three in-scope objectives within Prime at the moment. So that can either be retirement, so that encompasses both superannuation and also pensions. You've got protection, which is obviously your insurance, and estate planning. Okay, so they're the only three sort of in-scope objectives that you would add. Any other ones, so let's say for example, you're scoping out the client's savings, so they might have savings in a bank account, but you've discussed that and they don't want to scope that in as part of their SOA. You then select the savings tab. Is this objective in scope? Check no. So this description here will be the white label within the SOA. So whatever you change here, you might just change this label to savings. And the comments here is the reason why you're scoping it out, basically. Okay. So whatever you type in here will flow through into the objective section within the SOA. I mentioned before objectives should be ordered in the order of priority. So if, say, for example, insurance was the higher priority, we can actually drag and drop this up. And what that will then do is change the flow and the order of the screens as you go through Prime. Okay, so I'm just going to change it back. I'm just going to move superannuation to the top because I do want to see the retirement objective first when I go through Prime. Okay, so that sort of wraps up that section, the discovery section and the objective section within the hints and tips. I will now go through three areas within facts, which I think are quite important. So the objective funds, insurance protection, so I'll explain the difference between express, in-depth and quick quote, and the investment style slider within this area. So they're sort of the most common sort of questions we get. So I'm just going to jump straight into facts, and I'll take you through this objective funds area. So the objective funds is if the client has any surplus or lump sum available to allocate towards the objective, while putting an amount here, you're then able to use those funds towards the objectives, and we can do that in the analysis area, which is where you do your strategic advice or modelling. If the client doesn't have any surplus funds, or if they don't want to sort of use any of those funds, so you might just be doing sort of a rebalance, then you wouldn't have to put anything in this objective funds area. I'm just going to jump straight to insurance, and I'll explain the express, in-depth and quick quote. So for the express and quick quote options, so you shouldn't be using that because it's non-compliant. The option that you should be using is in-depth. Okay, so in-depth allows you to use the insurance needs analysis. It also has questions, which allows you to capture the amount of cover recommended for the client. I'm just going to jump now to the retirement section and explain the investment style slider you can see in front of your screen. So this is not the client's risk profile. So what Prime is doing here, it's actually trying to capture what the client's existing investment style is, and there are some inbuilt smarts in that it's picking up the information that you put in the Prime fact find, and it will suggest what the possible investment style may be for the client. Okay, so the client's predominantly invested, let's say for example, their superannuation fund in a growth fund. It will then suggest this client is in a 70% growth fund, in which case if you click on that little blue link, it will then update the investment style slider, or you can just manually slide it yourself. Okay, so do note this is not the risk profile. This is what the client's current investment style is, usually based on their superannuation, or if they've got investments, a combination of both of those. Okay, so that then leads us on to the analysis section. So this is, I'll take you through the area where you actually do update the client's risk profile. I'll also take you through how you can view sort of cash flow in the analysis area, and using the refresh button to refresh any data that you've updated, or if data is not updating, to use the refresh button to do that. Okay, so let's get into the area where we now capture the client's risk profile. So that's done in analysis. And you usually need to have a retirement objective to go in there and update the investment style. Okay, so if I now click on Analyze within the Superannuation Review, and there is an investment strategy option here, and this is where you'd go in and update the client's risk profile. Okay, so just running some Monte Carlo simulations there. So these Monte Carlo simulations will just give you an idea of what the client's superannuation objective would look like in different market conditions, in poor, normal, and in good market conditions. So it is crunching a lot of numbers there, so that's why usually this takes quite a while. Okay, so I'm just going to close this down, and I will take you through. So once you've gone in here and done your strategic advice, you can then view some of the outcomes or projections and cash flows in these tables here. So if you want to view superannuation, okay, so year by year, you can do that. There are also cash flow tables, and these will all appear in the SOA. So you usually have a current and a proposed table within the SOA. Okay, so lastly, if you do make any changes within this area, and let's say, for example, this graph isn't updating, click on refresh, and you find most of the time that will then refresh the screen, and your graph or your table or any changes that you make will then update within Prime. Okay, so the refresh button is quite an important button to use there. Okay, the last area I'm going to take you through is the assumptions area. Okay, so the assumptions area is actually quite important because this is the area, whatever you update in here will impact the cash flow and projections both in Prime and in your statement of advice. Okay, so there's three different areas: the general, protection and retirement tab, and I'll take you through the key sections which you should be focusing on within the assumptions in Prime. Okay, so assumptions can be found in both current and analysis, the chevron tabs, when you're navigating Prime. So I'm in analysis, and I'll click on the assumptions area here. So the first assumption I'll take you through is this life expectancy. So Prime does default to a plus 5-year life expectancy. If you do want to change that back to the life expectancy originally, you can change that. And obviously, that will make a difference to the client's projections and how much their assets are going to last in retirement. Okay, so but do note it is a plus 5-year as a default. Okay, so the retirement tab is a good tab for you to review whether you've captured the client's current investment style correctly, in the facts area I showed you earlier, and also whether you've captured the client's risk profile correctly. So let's say, for example, in this scenario that the client's current investment style was growth, but we've done a risk profile, and now that it's different, this will then tell us if we've actually updated that. So if you haven't updated it, simply go back to that area I showed you previously, the investment style, and change the client's risk profile. Okay, so the client employee contribution, this will flow through from what you've entered in either the Prime fact find or in Discovery. Whatever you update in here, this is what Prime is going to use as part of the cash flow. Okay, so down the bottom we've got an area where we can capture insurance premiums within Super and also any initial and ongoing fees within Super. Okay, so you can capture what the client's current and proposed is, and this will then flow through to the superannuation cash flow section within Prime. For any insurances outside of superannuation, so typically for things like trauma and perhaps income protection, that is sitting outside of Super, that's within the protection tab within assumptions. Okay, so this is where you'd update any premiums that's coming out from the client's cash flow or out-of-pocket expenses. Okay, so that pretty much concludes the hints and tips webinar for today.
So Nan, thank you very much for presenting today.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Very good set of tips that you've gone through with us, and I look forward to talking to everyone for the next webinar.